All right, and welcome back to Prompt and Purpose, another episode, of today's episode number 4. And I would like to talk about a little trap I fell into, and that is using all the models that are available in the IDE and not knowing how to. So sort of what was the problems I created, and then what I by now learned a bit how to make better use of the different models that you have available. So long story short, I in the beginning was super stoked to find out that there are different models that you can choose from. I think most builders can do that. So with anti-gravity, you have the Gemini, so their own Google AI versions, which have also a higher limit, by the way. Then you have the Claude, Sonnet, and Opus, which are more for coding and they're really good. And then you also have GPT, which are really good models. The cool thing is, for each one of them, let me put it back. All right. You see the rate limits that you have in anti-gravity, how many there are, and when they refresh. Now, Claude and GPT, they use a lot more tokens when they work because they do a lot of steps in between. So they do like thinking steps and all this stuff. And Gemini usually is a bit easier on your tokens. So I didn't know that in the beginning. Also, when I started, the token rate was way, way higher. So I would, just go really wild with all those tokens. There's also a thing called AI overages. So if the quota is reached, you have a certain set amount of credits that you could use. And if you really want to finish a task, you could enable the overages, and then you would, for me, I have 1,000 AI credits, I think, every month. And you just burn through these as well until your token credits are completely emptied, and then you would have to buy the next package, which is usually really expensive. So in the beginning, what I did is I basically orchestrated everything in one big, massive pile of chaos. So I was thinking about what I wanted to build and wrote quite a detailed prompt. And then I usually called Claude or Gemini write a initial plan. Now, with this initial plan, I then went to my AI tutor, which is one thing I really think is worth it if you're not really good at coding like me. And I just asked it about, hey, it did this here. What does it mean? And then I Gemini explain it to me in a separate chat. And I would go back and just do corrections on literally everything. And I repeated this for hours. So I would ask Gemini for logic questions, then switch in the same chat to Claude Sonnet for UI refinement. Then I went to Claude Opus and did something else. Then I had an audit. Then I did an audit of that audit. Then I did a review of what they found and the problems. And I sort of looped around this for quite a long time, which is incredibly inefficient. And it had mostly to do because I had actually no idea what I was doing, right? So I just reviewed it and cross-reviewed it. And by now, I think there's a bit a better way than, completely over-engineering that. So first is I basically fell a bit into a product bloat trap. So as you can see here in the back, I still have one of the documents that I prepared back then when I first built it. It was the social sharing module. And as you can see, I have 1,000 lines here just with all the steps, what it should be like, how a unit tests that are there, just everything was planned out. But it was incredibly overkill because if I just wanted to have a social share function, it would have been way enough just to build a very, very, very lean idea of what I want to build, or even just a hollow UI. Okay, that's what the user will do. Is that good enough? And then you just build function by function. What does it have to do? And you build through the whole thing like this, step by step. And you also don't do it all in one chat. You have one problem in one chat, and then you take the next chat to do the next problem. It takes a bit of getting used to it, but there's a reason to it, and which I'll get to in another episode why it is much better. So I could have saved a lot of time with reiterating myself if I would not have done that in the beginning. The second thing is, if I planned out everything, it doesn't really mean that it works if you don't know, what the consequences are of what you are planning. So I did, for instance, build something, and then with the next module, the agent sort of tried to solve the problem that I gave it, which is their job, right? But it doesn't mean it's solved correctly, or that the architecture that we have so far is really compatible with what we're doing right now. So just because it looks good and congruent doesn't mean that it just fucks up the entire rest of your code base. And because I did not really know, I started then implementing, and it basically crashed hundreds of other things every time. And I just accepted it because I thought like, yes, it looks good because we thought about this. And I introduced a shit ton of bugs in other things because I had no ideas about the dependencies. Where is the whole thing, like where's the backbone of the entire app, and how should we use that? Because I have no idea about architecture. By now I do, which, then changed how I would build the new features. The third thing is you will forget about something, inevitably. So for me, it was in the beginning, it was vulnerabilities, or having a scalable infrastructure, the right database, the API things, and so on. And I thought I meticulously planned everything, but if you just entered a metric ton of bugs into the core mechanic, you have a terrible architecture afterwards that is incredibly inefficient, but it sort of does the job, which is really, really what happens with most of the vibe coding tool. They do what you tell them, but the code is just horrible, absolutely garbage. That's why there's people that go and correct vibe coded stuff, which is sort of funny that we try to use a tool and it just makes everything worse for everyone. But then, yeah. However, it did what the prompt wanted, right? So it built that just in a bad way. Now, I've built for many, many weeks now with different codes, and I think there are definitely better ways than going back and forth. If you are a very advanced person down the line, you will know the consequences, and you will feature by feature unpack it and then let it plan and audit it, especially have a very complex architecture, because you know what to ask, you know what to search for, and then the planning becomes really good. If you're like me and you just have an entire full whole package of a module, it's really incredible inefficient. So I would definitely not recommend that. I think a way better way is to build first the hollow UI. So if possible with screenshots. So what do you want to do and how should it look like? What does the user do? If I'm the user, I want to share this card by clicking on a button on the bottom right, for instance, and then I should share it to X or to LinkedIn. How could this look like? And you just build this hollow UI, and then you go through the functions. Okay, to do this, what do we need? Now let's add this. When does it show? Where does it go to? If you go through your module step by step like that, especially if it's a bit bigger, you will get way more to points where you're like, it doesn't really need that. In the end, once you've done that, right, you will have to do all the security things anyway. You have all the tests that you should have done in the beginning, what it should be doing when the whole backend is built. And this makes the code usually a lot leaner because it will way more go into the direction of okay, that's what we do, and we use the same elements over and over again, which is just a lot. It's called dry architecture. So you try to use the code just once and then go back to it instead of repeating it and doing it over and over again. So that's, I think, I definitely learned from using anti-gravity. And next time, good prompting and the architecture, how I built this, and then about the skills that you can use to make your prompting better. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.